You know what, I'm just going to read this, a little paragraph before we get to last week. After 420 years since the promise to Abraham, after 40 years in the desert, the giving of the law, etc., the Israelites have finally entered Canaan, being led by Joshua, whose name actually translates Jesus, or Jehovah saves. He's the new Moses who will lead them across the Jordan, just like Moses led everybody across the Red Sea to conquer the land. And it's complicated, but there is a very real teaching in this that God had warned the Canaanites, even back from the time of Abraham, about his intent. And those who seek peace with the Israelites can and will assimilate into Israel. Some do. But apparently, narrow is the gate. Because thus far, pretty much only Rahab and her family, the Gibeonites, and then a scattering of foreigners, aliens, and sojourners, we don't know how many, will submit their will to God and be saved. And those who opposed will be harem, which means destroyed, unsalvageable, so to speak. Yeah. And before getting to last week's review, I thought it was important to also always remind everybody after every big act of judgment that God will be holding the Israelites to the same standard, right? He's not playing favorites. And I love this, and it's funny because this concept has actually come up in casual conversations I've been having with people and over coffee. But one of my favorite lines in the whole book of Joshua is one word: neither, right? Who was I play acting this out with? Was it you guys on Thursday morning? Yeah, we were play acting it out. We were picturing, Joshua seeing some dude with a sword, and he kind of comes running down there, and he goes, "Are you with us or are you against us?" Not realizing that he's talking to God. And God's response is, "Neither, bro." And the bro's on me, all right. Well, in the Hebrew, I think it says bro, or maybe brada. Anyways. Brohim, yeah. Because God's not on our side. We either are on his side or we're not on his side. And that goes for the Israelites as well as it does for the Canaanites. God has a standard. God has a law. He makes his will clear and then invites you to either come on aboard, submit your will, and live under him and under his law, or in this case, and specifically, which has been rough for us, perish, okay? In fact, that concept comes out in that word neither, but it's illustrated through the life and death of Achan, the disobedient Israelite, right? Who's punished for his disobedience. He's actually harammed, right? As it were. Okay, so last week I started out my review like this: brutal, brutal, brutal. Though we struggled to find some quote-unquote gems of teaching and theology in there, and some Bible nerd stuff, the overall lesson was very stark, but also I thought very powerful. One gem, before we get into the violence, is the combination of man's efforts with God's miraculous power. For one example, the army of Israel marched all night long. It was an overnight march to gain 3,500 feet in elevation, only to have God rout the army with hailstones, right? So it's a combination of man's effort and God's miraculous power, which is a great overall lesson for us in our lives. Tom, I love that quote you gave me from Pastor Vaughn, which is, if you ask God to move mountains, be prepared for him to hand you a shovel, right? I love that one. Okay, so to summarize all the violence of last week, I would like to begin by saying, we teach this all the time around here, that the Old Testament is a physical and material representation of what Christ and the New Testament will bring spiritually. So as a brief review, Egypt, of course, represents slavery, which is a picture of sin and death. Passover, of course, is a representation of the blood of Christ passing over and redeeming the nation of Israel, or us. Passing through the Red Sea is a physical picture of the spiritual act of baptism. And now we have the promised land, which is a physical, material representation or picture of sort of not just heaven, but communion with God. And in this promised land, there can be no sin, selfishness, unrighteousness, or pridefulness, which is why heaven will have none of that. But of course, this is the Old Testament, so there will be plenty of that anyways. However, the overall concept is you must submit your will fully to God and his laws, even the Israelites. And I brought this up at the end of last week. Wherever we see in the Bible where holiness meets sin, sin is always destroyed. The most perfect illustration of that is always light and dark. If you turn on a light switch in a dark room, what happens to the darkness? It evaporates. It's gone. I have a little pet theory about that too, is at the edge where the light meets the darkness is always violence. Where holiness meets sinfulness, it's a violent act against sinfulness and unrighteousness. And I think that is perfectly exhibited on the cross of Jesus Christ, where God's holiness lays out the wrath, and it is a violent death that our Savior dies. However, that judgment is what brings about community with God, communion with each other, and righteousness. Okay? Okay, I said all that. So, the people of Canaan are fundamentally offered the same deal as people today. Submit to God and receive his protection, or be destroyed. And if it sounds harsh, remember that the laws that he's asking us to submit to are the highest standards of love, community, and righteousness on the planet. Like, think about that, right? What he's asking us to do is give up ourselves, give up our sinful, selfish, greedy ways, and live lives of righteousness and giving. That is, in effect, what he's asking us to do. And so if you hear, by the way, I thought this morning while I put this together. If you hear this concept of God saying, hey, either submit your will to me or be destroyed, and you think, well, that doesn't sound fair, meet your sinful nature. That is your sinful nature. If that kind of makes you kind of get a little bit like, well, that doesn't seem fair, if God would say, submit your will to me or die, well, where's freedom in that? Well, that's your sinful nature, who desperately wants what? Autonomy, right? Your own power, your own authority, and not to submit your authority to another. But God says, submit unto me. And then what we find out is that is where real perfect freedom lives anyways, because to live in Christ is to be free, really free. Okay, does that make sense? Does that kind of get a little bit awkward there or whatever? Yeah? But it's interesting how many people will refuse to submit their will to God, even when offered destruction instead. They'll pick destruction over that. Okay? Okay, so tonight is the division of the land. We're actually going to cover chapters 13 to 21. So I don't think we're actually going to do 10 chapters. I think it works out like 9 or something. But anyway, so join me in chapter 13, and let's read verse 1. When Joshua was old and well and advanced in years, the Lord said to him, you are very old.
And advanced in years. I heard that a lot.
Yeah, well, from God? Wow. But there are still very large areas of land to be taken over. So Joshua's old, but remember the job is not finished. Despite all the victories and even some, what I wrote is, how do you pronounce this word? I wrote it down myself. I didn't make it up. But hyperbolic? Hyperbolic? Anybody?
Hyperbole.
Hyperbole? Yeah, but it doesn't work.
It is hyperbolic.
Hyperbolic, I can say that? Okay, all right. Despite all the victories and even some hyperbolic statements like this, I went and found one. And Joshua took the entire land as instructed by Moses. There are actually a lot of areas in that area still inhabited by Canaanites, and the complete victory over the entire actual promised land that was originally promised to Abraham won't happen until David comes into his kingdom, or as we like to say fancily, the Davidic kingdom. By the way, I found this number today. I didn't realize it was so perfect. You know how many years it is between right now and Joshua and David? 400. Isn't that interesting? Just one of those great biblical numbers that always seems to come. 400 years in slavery, 400 years between Joshua entering the promised land and the actual kind of creation of the Davidic kingdom, and then 400 years of silence until Christ shows up after the last prophet. Anyways, I thought that was interesting, yeah?
10 generations.
10 generations, yeah, exactly 10 generations. Okay, so Joshua's 85 years old, and it's interesting because it says the time of war is over and then the land had rest from war. Remember how we ended up with that verse last week? That was the last verse we read. Well, unfortunately, not exactly, because if you read ahead tonight's lesson, they're not really done. In fact, they really won't ever be done until David kind of eventually squashes all resistance, yeah? It's always going to continue. So let's jump into the second part of verse 6. I just want to read the second part of verse 6 and 7. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel for an inheritance as I have instructed you, and divide it as an inheritance among the 9 tribes and half of the tribe of Manasseh. Okay? So he's talking about the land west of the Jordan, which we'll get there. But it's basically, I want to set that up, is God is saying, okay, now is the time to divide, even though it hasn't been a complete and total military victory over all pockets of resistance. Because remember this, Joshua's commission was not only to conquer the land, but he was also to be in charge of dividing it. And our commission tonight is to read about it. So note that there will be a lot of inclusions about the East Siders. You guys know who I'm talking about, the East Siders? Is the half tribe of Manasseh and Gad and Reuben. They are the ones who've been allotted land on the east side of the Jordan. There is a natural division between the east and west because of the Jordan River, which is why, scholars call this the Transjordanian nation. Get it? Because it's over the Jordan. However, one guy I read said the reason why they're going to talk so much about the east side tribes tonight is to make sure that they're included into the unity of the nation of Israel. Does that make sense? To make sure that they're not thought of less east of the Jordan. It keeps talking about all the tribes east and west. And as I wrote that statement down this morning, it occurred to me, the eventual division of the nation of Israel would not be an east-west division, would it? But a north-south division shortly after the time of, Solomon, actually, after David. Okay, let's read verse 13. But the Israelites did not drive out the people of Geshur and Maacah, so they continued to live among the Israelites to this day. I just want to pause here for a second. I wish Garrett were here tonight, because if we were reading the Daily Bread today and that verse was in the Daily Bread, I just want to let you know there's a great applicational teaching that we've kind of not really addressed head on. And I don't think it's the central point of our study tonight, but it's a good teaching, and so I just want to share it with you. You might have even read it in the Daily Bread. If you've been reading the Daily Bread for years like me, they probably used it, 15, 20 times in the last 10 years. Okay, and that is this. Leaving the Canaanite tribes there is a picture of us leaving sin in our lives. And wherever we have and allow sin to stay in our lives, it will always come back to haunt us. God desires that we would get rid of all sin in our lives. And so what we find in the book, not in the book of Joshua, but in later years, the very tribes that they allowed to continue to live in their land are going to cause them a bunch of trouble, like the Philistines, etc., that will come get them. So I just I saw that line and I thought, they continue to live among the Israelites today. What happens is Jewish men will intermarry the Canaanite women. They will begin to worship Baal, and it causes all kinds of problems, let alone military campaigns against them. Okay, let's read verse 14. But to the tribe of Levi, he gave no inheritance, since the offerings made by fire to the Lord, the God of Israel, are their inheritance as he promised them. And I figure that's because Ministries is such a joy that they didn't need to have any land. I'm being a little facetious there. Steve laughed. Thank you. Actually, in fact, if you go over to verse 3, though, I like verse 33 at the end of this chapter. I like what it says here. Verse 33, but to the tribe of Levi, Moses had given no inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance as he promised them. Now we're going to unpack that at the beginning of next week when we read, we'll cover this in chapter 21, because what we're going to find out, it's really interesting, even though they are not technically given, land, they are given towns and actually pastures to raise their sheep on. So you're kind of like, well, isn't that land? Well, yes and no. But what God's going to do is he's going to scatter them. So they won't sort of have their own like homeland of the Levites that they can sort of defend against other people. But God is going to scatter them because their job is to offer sacrifice and to handle all the, the purification rituals and all the priestly duties. So they will be scattered. What was it supposed to be? You were supposed to have a Levite priest within a day's walk of wherever you lived in Israel. I don't know how true that worked out, and I don't even know if that's scriptural. It's something I read or heard somewhere, but you get the idea. But they'll be given towns. We'll cover that more next week, but he's kind of setting it up right now for the rest of the thing, the rest of the book. Okay, so then basically, briefly, he covers, I think in verse 25, he just briefly talks about the division of the east side. If you look on the map, did I give away all my maps? Oh, does somebody have a spare map? I'll take a map. Yeah, thanks. I know, it's like, yeah, I know, yeah. Okay, so if you look there, it's really obvious. Look at the Jordan River, and then you see you've got East Manasseh and West Manasseh there, and Gad and Reuben. East Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, all on the east side of the Jordan, and then West Manasseh and everybody else on the west side. So 2.5 tribes. So by the way, they can now go home, right? Because they crossed the Jordan to help their brothers conquer the west side of the Jordan, and now they can return home. So let's get into a little bit of land division west of the Jordan. I'll jump to chapter 14, verse 2. Their inheritances were assigned by lot to the 9.5 tribes as the Lord had commanded through Moses. Wow, divided by lot. Okay, now by the way, this was instructed way back in the Pentateuch. It occurs in both Numbers chapter 26 and also, Numbers chapter 33, where they are told, when you cross into the land, you are to divide the land by lot. Now, what does that mean, to divide the land by lot? Well, it could mean a bunch of things, and nobody's 100% sure. It could be they use the Urim and Thummim, Urim and Thummim, whatever that is. And I know I'm being facetious when I say whatever that is, because if you've ever studied it before, it's still hard to tell exactly what that is. It's something that the priests carried in their garments, but we really don't have much description. Or it could have been a way to toss sticks or dice or number cubes. You know what a number cube is?
Dice.
Yeah, dice. Yeah, it's dice for Christians who aren't allowed to use dice, okay? There is also a rabbinical tradition that what they did was they had 2 bowls. One bowl was full of slips of paper that had the different divisions of the land, and the other bowl had the name of the 9.5 tribes. And they would pick the name and then pick the area, but nobody is really sure. The one thing I want you all to understand, though, lest you start, flipping coins to work out the ways of your life or whatever, yeah, is according to the book of Proverbs, Proverbs 16:33, it says this: "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." Now, the way they chose the division of the land comes up much later in the study tonight. And I want to tell you right now because I think it's really cool, but I'm going to save it. Okay, it's kind of cool the way they do it. I thought it was very smart the way they did it. Okay, but let's keep reading. Let's read verses 6 to 12 because Caleb's going to get a special dispensation right now.
Yay, Caleb.
Yay, Caleb. So chapter 14, verse 6. Now the men of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my brothers who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt with fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old, with an exclamation mark. I'm still as strong as today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now, give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard that the Anakites were there and that their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said.
Big guys.
Caleb is not afeared, is he, at all, yeah? So anyways, what I want to say about that, well, most of you know the backstory here. It's hard to sort of overstate the faithfulness of Caleb, right, in the book of Exodus, yeah? He was like, let's do it. We can take these guys. We are not, I am not scared. Jesus would say this about him. His hand was fit for the plow, right? Because, yeah, he's not fit, his hand is not fit for the plow, but his hand was fit for the plow. He said, God said we can do it, we can do it. J. Vernon McGee had some funny comments about this. He said, and I never thought about this. I actually never really thought about this. But imagine the last 40 years for Caleb. He's been in the desert, right? And imagine like somebody saying, this is J. Vernon McGee saying, somebody saying, wow, it sure is hot here in the desert, isn't it, Caleb? And Caleb thinking, yeah. And if it wasn't for you monkeys, we'd be in the land of milk and honey. And all the manna, and quail. Caleb might have been thinking about all that milk and honey that he saw. Because remember, he went up and he spied out the land. Now, I don't know if you notice what's going on here, but what Caleb is asking for is the actual part of the land he scouted out. And that's what he was promised. And so if you look on your map, it's where the tribe of Judah is in green. So you can kind of see, you can kind of imagine where they were in the desert. They sent the spies out, and that's the area, the mountain area that he spied out. Now notice that it doesn't appear, does it? It doesn't appear yet that part of the land has been perfectly subdued by the words of Caleb. But notice he doesn't seem any more afraid now than he did 40 years ago, right? He's not seeing giants, right? He's seeing grasshoppers. We can do this, okay? And then we'll finish up by reading verse 13. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called blah, 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 blah. Who was the greatest man, da, da, da. And then the land had rest from the war. Not really, okay? Because there's more war coming up. But by the way, some of this stuff is written, it's not written in perfect chronological order. Okay, and we're going to start speeding things up here a little bit. And I realize I'm skipping a lot of stuff. And so if you see something and you're like, how could you skip that? Let me know. Let's keep going. Okay, so chapter 15 is going to just be a brief overlook of how they conquer that area of Hebron. And I actually want to skip down to verse 15. From Hebron, does that same truck drive by like 15 times all night? Is he just driving up and down the... or is it like everybody's got a truck that sounds like that? I don't know. Anyways, okay, let's read verses 15 to 17. So from Hebron, Caleb drove out the three Anakites. These must be kings. Sheshai, Ahiman. I never noticed that before. I'll bet he's a good fisherman, yeah? and Talmai, descendants of Anak. And from there he marched against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kirath Sefer. And Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksah in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sepher. And Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Aksah to him in marriage. Now, this is interesting, yeah? Wait, where did I? Oh, first of all, Othniel gets Caleb's daughter. Now, I thought it looked awkward at first because, did you do the math on that too? If Othniel is the son of Kezem, Caleb's brother, and he takes Caleb's daughter as a wife, isn't that his cousin? Well, so I went and looked in it, and apparently that word brother can mean a lot of things, including like fellow tribal member or distant relative. So let's hope they weren't first cousins anyways. But the only other thing interesting about that is Othniel, that guy, Othniel, he becomes the first judge of Israel in the book of Judges. Right, exactly. So kind of, what's that?
The book of Othniel.
The book of Othniel, right, yeah. But just kind of, little Bible trivial right there. But he apparently was sort of Caleb's right-hand man. And then it's interesting, Caleb's daughter is going to make an interesting request of him right now in verse 18. Verse 18, one day when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. And when she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, "What can I do for you?" She replied, "Do me a special favor. Since you've given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. Now, if you read carefully between there, it's interesting. She asked her husband to ask Caleb. He apparently doesn't do it. So she has to take matters into her own hands and ask her dad for this spring. In the NIV, they reckon this is probably a wedding present, is what she asked for, was springs. Now, also, think about this. If you've been with us in Israel before and you've been to the Negev, you know how important it would be to have a spring of water, because it is like the moon on that side without water. It is dusty and dry. In fact, when we do that hike up to En-Gedi, we get to swim in those beautiful waterfalls and pools and everything where David eventually hid from Saul. And so she's smart. She's like, okay, you gave us all this land in the Negev, but we're going to need some water. And so she, calls in her chits, so to speak, and asks dad for a wedding present and gets a couple nice springs out of it. And then we'll wrap up verse 63. I thought this was interesting, which is why I highlighted it. Verse 63, Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem, and to this day the Jebusites live there with the people of Judah. Now, the reason why I thought that was interesting is because I remember earlier on when I read that they conquered the whole land of that Moses had told them to conquer, I thought, well, gee, that's interesting, because I remember David capturing Jerusalem from the Jebusites. And I remember it was in this class I actually speculated out loud. I wonder if, they conquered Jerusalem and then somebody else reconquered it so that David had to go take it again. But apparently not. So I don't know if you guys are Bible nerds like me and you could remotely care about this kind of stuff, but to me it's interesting that we read right here, they did not conquer Jerusalem. Now, and remember, Jerusalem was quite the fortified city, and if you've been there, you've seen it. It's up on top of a mountain, and it has its own natural spring, so it makes it a really difficult place to conquer. And not surprisingly, it's another 400 years before they conquer and capture, I should say, Jerusalem. And then David, of course, will set that up to be the focal point and the capital city of the nation of Israel. Any questions about that? I hope you're finding some of this interesting. I'm doing the best I can, man. Okay, chapter 16. This is the portion of Ephraim. So let's all look on our maps and see where Ephraim is. Where is Ephraim? Oh, it's that little sliver, yeah? Oh, yeah, there it is, just sort of above Bethel there. Okay, Ephraim. Let's read chapter 16, verse 1. The allotment for Joseph, 16? Yeah. The allotment for Joseph began at the Jordan of Jericho, east of the waters of Jericho, and went up from there through the desert into the hill country of Bethel. Joseph? Did you all kind of wonder, what is that? How could it be the tribe of Joseph? Well, Ephraim is part of the Manasseh conglomeration there. In fact, let me just read to you. I thought the notes covered it really well from the NIV. Although Joseph was one of Jacob's 12 sons, he did not have a tribe named after him. This was because Joseph, as the oldest son of Jacob's wife Rachel, think about that, the oldest son of Jacob's wife Rachel, the favored wife, received a double portion of the inheritance, a double portion. This double portion was given to Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, whom Joseph considered as his own. The largest territory and the greatest influence of the northern half of Israel belonged to their tribes. Okay? So, yes and no. Now let's skip over to verse 10. They did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day, the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor. It's another example to me where it's sort of unclear how assimilated or not assimilated those Canaanites were, who were like subjected to forced labor, or how much trouble these people specifically would cause them. We just don't know. There's a lot going on here and we don't know. And by the way, since I'm telling you right now there's a lot going on that we don't know now, maybe seems like an opportune time to explain to you. As we get later to some other tribes, you might be looking, when you look at things like in the hill countries, pick any random thing where it starts describing villages. There's a ton of these villages they've never found that are lost to us. And so there's a lot of speculation. You know, you can imagine a lot of guys, doing their PhD dissertation of trying to find some of these villages and figuring out where the boundaries were. In fact, this map I've given you, what did I do with it? This map I've given you, this is one set of boundaries, but you'll find if you go online and you Google the the division of land of the 12 tribes, they don't all look exactly the same. There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of gray area and blurred lines about where that village of Kadesh Sereth might or might not have actually been. So we don't really know exactly what was going on with these Canaanites that were living among the people of Ephraim that were required to do forced labor. But let's go to the next chapter, 17, and look at the portion of Manasseh. Let's go to verses 3 to 6. Verse 1, this is the allotment for the tribe of Manasseh as Joseph's firstborn. And then verse 3. Now there's a good word. Zelophehad, son of Hefer, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, had no sons. Okay, so the son of Manasseh had no sons, but only daughters, whose names were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. By the way, if you always thought Noah was simply a guy's name, apparently not. Yeah, because I've known a couple girls named Noah, and maybe that's where they actually get it from. They went to Eleazar the priest, Joshua's son of Nun, and the leaders and said, "The Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our brothers." So Joshua gave them an inheritance along with the brothers of their father, according to the Lord's command. Manasseh's share consisted of 10 tracts of land besides Gilead and Bashan east of the Jordan, because the daughters of the tribe of Manasseh received an inheritance among the sons. The land of Gilead belonged to the rest of the descendants of Manasseh. It's kind of confusing here, but it seems like this section right here is a little bit of a retelling of the story, but it sort of alludes to why Manasseh gets a large portion, which will become an issue shortly because Ephraim's going to grumble a little bit. But the retelling of this, of why they got so much land, why it went to the daughters, seems to almost set up the section that comes next when Ephraim grumbles about, hey, how come Manasseh got so much more land than we got? Because look at how small Ephraim is compared to Manasseh. And Ephraim's going to make the claim that we have just as many people, okay? So apparently this was all set up from the very beginning. In fact, if we drop down to verse 14, chapter 17, verse 14, the people of Joseph, that's assuming to be Ephraim, the people of Joseph said to Joshua, why have you given us only one allotment and one portion for inheritance? We are a numerous people, and the Lord has blessed us abundantly. Now, this is interesting. Did you know Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim? Did you know that? I think I would have guessed Judah if I was taking a Bible quiz. Now, interestingly enough, I think I might have taught that on the first night when I talked about who is this guy Joshua. I probably said, well, he's from the tribe of Ephraim, but I have forgotten, because if you had asked me yesterday what tribe was Joshua, I think I would have guessed Judah. I would have been wrong. He is from the tribe of Ephraim. So now the tribe of Ephraim is coming to him, a fellow tribal member, and saying, what is the deal? How come you gave Manasseh, our half-brother tribe, like triple the land you've given us? We want, justice or whatever, yeah? And if you look on the map, you can see the problem. In fact, if anything, Joshua cannot be accused of nepotism, can he? Right? And if you want to see like what a tough old coot Joshua was, by the way, does anybody know what Joshua's nickname was? Old coot? No, that's the dog. I don't know. I forget where I came across that or whatever, but I didn't forget it. But talk about a tough old bird, this guy. Look at how he answers the grumbling from his fellow tribe members in verse 15. If you're so numerous, Joshua answered, and if the hill country of Ephraim is too small for you, well, go up into the forest and clear the land for yourselves there in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaites. And the people of Joseph replied, the hill country is not enough for us, and all the Canaanites who live in the plains have iron chariots, both those in Beth-shan and in settlements and those in the valley of Jezreel. But Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, you're numerous and very powerful. You will have not only one allotment, but the forested hill country as well. Clear it, and its farthest limits will be yours. Though the Canaanites have iron chariots, and though they are strong, you can drive them out.
Where would this territory be now?
Well, it's the hill country above Bethel, as far as I can tell. He's talking about a mountainous region I'm assuming, in that zone, and perhaps he's even going up into what is called West Manasseh, because he does include Manasseh in this. He says this. I just love his kind of tough love thing. Now, it's important because it's, he says, you want it, go get it. This is what you've been given. And it's important to remember, how did they get assigned that land? By what?
Lots.
By lots. And according to Proverbs chapter 16, who controls the lots? God. So they're grumbling about what God has given them, right? Okay? By the way, the NIV teaching says down below, they never did go capture that hill country, or at least we have no proof of them. They just grumbled and didn't do anything about it. But I just like that little section, because Joshua's like, all right, you guys are so numerous, go get it. Yeah. Go get it. It's yours. What's that? Yeah, it does. It does. It does sound like something he'd say. You think kind of at this point, Joshua's kind of had it with people doubting God and doubting God. Yeah, doubting the faithfulness. Like he just spent 40 years wandering in the desert because other people were afraid to go get it, right? Okay. So now let's handle the rest of the land in chapter 18, verses 1 to 2. So the whole assembly of the Israelites gathered at Shiloh and set up what? The tent of the meeting, or the tabernacle. The country was brought under their control, but there were still 7 Israelite tribes who had not yet received their inheritance. Now, before we go a step further on that, isn't it kind of cool? They set up the tabernacle. It's been a long time. This is the first instance of the tabernacle being set up since we've started the book of Joshua. It is the first appearance in the book of Joshua.
Any idea how many years?
I don't know where we're at. And here's what's, okay, since Lewis just asked any idea how many years, here's the confusing part for us right now. Not every commentator I read addressed this issue, but a couple did, and I thought it was interesting. It is really hard to tell where what we're reading here in chapter 18, where it occurs on the timeline. It might have actually occurred like back in chapter 10 or 11 even, before they actually, while they were still at war. There's just a lot of like backwards and forwards stuff going on here. It is not a clean chronological telling of everything that's going on here, okay? So we're not really sure exactly when this is. But now we're getting to verse 4, which for me, I really enjoy how they did the division of the land. Let's read verse 4. This is what Joshua tells them. Appoint 3 men from each tribe. I will send them out to make a survey of the land and to write a description of it according to the inheritance of each. Then they will return to me, and you are to divide the land into 7 parts. Judah is to remain the territory in the south, and the house of Joseph to the territory on the north. Okay, let me just back up here for a second. So they send out 21 dudes, right? I'm doing the math. 3 guys from 7 tribes. Is my math good on that? Because I'm not really good at math. Okay. And what do? They go out and they survey the land and write a description of it according to the inheritance of each, right? Basically what they do is they go up and they set up what they think are good borders for everybody. Now think about what's going to happen. They're going to come back, and are they guaranteeing themselves what land they're going to get? Not at all. So think about how wise this is. They're going to probably try to divide the land about as fairly as they can. To give you an illustration of what I mean by that, I want to take you back to a time when I was camping with my buddy Rocky down at Scorpion Bay, Baja. And it's kind of a funny story because my buddy Rocky was kind of a thick-set guy. He wrongly assumed that because I was so skinny, I didn't eat much. As Ron Kohler will attest, I can eat a lot. And when I'm surfing 6 hours a day, I can eat a lot of food. And Rocky was sort of unpleasantly surprised to find out that I could match him forkful for forkful. So what we would do, every night we would make these giant carbohydrate-heavy dinners of mostly pasta, noodles, rice, right? We called it the kitchen sink because we were out there for about 6 weeks at a stretch. And toward the end of the 6 weeks, you'd be getting down to the nitty-gritty of what's left in the box. And you would literally just take, a can of tuna, chicken, a can of corn, a can of beans, and just swirl it all up because we were desperate for the carbohydrates. And here's how we would do it. You ready for this? One guy would portion out the food, and the other guy would choose. Now, if that sounds like, and what's your point? Let me just kind of set up the situation for you. We're in the middle of nowhere, and there's nobody around. There were times we were the only 2 people for about 11 miles, right, in any direction. We didn't have a lot going on. There was no cell phone, nothing. So dinner was kind of a big event. And so the choosing of the portion turned into this enormously big deal. So the trick was if you were the portion guy, man, you tried like to get every noodle as equally portioned out as possible. And then sometimes when I would grab one portion, Rocky would go, oh man, I think that was the big one. Right? So my point is, I think this is what God's will was. He sends 21 dudes out and he says, portion out the land. And they don't know which land they're going to get. So it serves your own best interest, doesn't it, to sort of divvy it up as evenly as possible. Are you guys with me on that? And so that's exactly what they do. And so verses 9 and 10, where are we? Chapter 18, verses 9 and 10. So the men left and went through the land. They wrote its description on a scroll, town by town, in 7 parts, and returned to Joshua in the camp at Shiloh. Joshua then cast lots for them in Shiloh in the presence of the Lord, and then he distributed the land of the Israelites according to the tribal divisions. Okay? And now we're going to very, very briefly cover the divisions. Okay, I'm just going to do this sort of almost by tribe rather than by chapter. The tribe of Benjamin, which is the next portion here in chapter 18. Nothing really interesting there. You're welcome to read it and figure it all out. The only couple of things I found interesting, they get Jericho, which is interesting because remember they put a curse on the town. But if you remember, I think if you read the curse carefully, it says you're not to build armaments and fortresses. So they build around it because we know from the book of Samuel and Kings that people did inhabit Jericho. And by the way, I looked at a map of it today, and the modern city of Jericho is actually south of where the ruins are. The ruins have sort of been preserved, and the main portion of the city is south of that. And by the way, what a weird little city Jericho looks like, you know, because I Google mapped it and I walked around the town a little bit. It's a trippy little town. Anyways, it's Palestinian, and they don't, normally when you're on a tour of Israel, they don't take you into Jericho. And they'll tell you you're not allowed to go to Jericho, but what I saw today on Google Maps was there was Jews at the ruins of Jericho with their ringlets and everything, and I was like, hey, how come those guys get to go? And then in the background, I saw the Israeli defense guys with their Uzi machine guns guarding them, because it is a very, very unfriendly town for both Christians and Jews, the town of Jericho. The tribe of Benjamins also get the Gibeonites. Remember the Gibeonites? The acting troop, yeah, that decided to cast their lot, so to speak, with Israel. Well, Benjamin gets the Gibeonites. They must be a fun people. Anyways, that's what I thought. Okay, then next we have the tribe of Simeon, which is in chapter 19. Now, Simeon is really an interesting, bizarre little town. If you look on your map, look at the tribe of Judah in the green, and then you'll see Simeon, and it says scattered cities in Judah only. Well, the tribe of Simeon gets a portion of Judah for a couple reasons. Judah actually had more land than they needed because that was Caleb's portion. Remember, Caleb gets the choice portion because he was the faithful guy, and they ended up with more land than they actually needed. Oh, by the way, back when Jacob, you know, Jacob from Genesis, when he was sort of doing his blessing to his sons, he actually curses Simeon and says that they will be scattered amongst your brothers. And that is actually what happens. The tribe of Simeon gets scattered amongst the tribe of Judah. And by the way, in my own words, and I read a bunch about them a little bit, they're kind of the sad sack tribe of Israel that sort of dwindles. They don't really, not much really ever becomes of Simeon. And it's not really very well explained in this little section of scripture. But they don't seem to grumble much about it. For starters, they were part of the committee that went out. So it's kind of bizarre. Simeon, okay? Next tribe is Zebulun. Everybody knows all about the tribe of Zebulun, right? I don't. I'm just being facetious. It seems like I've never even heard of that tribe. Like if I was asked to give, hey, Dain, off the top of your head, list all the 12 tribes of Israel, I doubt I would remember Zebulun. Anyways, you can see where they are on the map. Nothing interesting about them at all. Same with Issachar. You can look at your map and see where they are. Nothing really interesting at all. Then you've got the tribe of Asher. If you've been to Israel and you surf, they got the best surf because that's a great section of coastline. What you might find interesting about that then is, you know, if you've gone to Israel with us, when you go up to Mount Carmel, that was part of the land of Asher. So if you remember on that Israel trip, we go up the coast. We actually follow the coast right there, and it is very beautiful with Caesarea and all is that beautiful. And then you turn inland and you go up the top of Mount Carmel. And remember, when the prophet Elijah is up there, he can look out and see the sea, and he sees the cloud coming in over the ocean. So that's the only really interesting thing. Actually, there's something more interesting happens as well. They actually are so far north that they have the north border with Sidon, which is modern day, anybody?
Syria.
Lebanon, actually. Lebanon, yeah. Modern day Lebanon. And by the way, the only thing interesting about that is if you're familiar with Sidon or whatever, throughout Judges, Kings, Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, they're a very powerful nation of Canaanites. They're the early Phoenicians. They were sea traders. And David actually trades with them. And I think they provide some of the timbers from Lebanon to build the temple. Okay? Okay, and then next up is the tribe of, where are we? Naphtali, another interesting tribe. Though they don't mention it, it's not mentioned much in these description here, and no commentators seem to mention it much. I thought, wow, they seem to enjoy a really good chunk of the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. So I'm going to guess they were fishermen, yeah? And that's all I really have to say about Naphtali. And then lastly, second to lastly, but we'll look at the tribe of Dan. Where's Dan? There you are, Dan. Yeah, Dan's people. Let's just read verse 47. But the Danites had difficulty taking possession of their territory, so they went up and attacked Leshem, took it, and put it to the sword and occupied it. They settled in Leshem and named it Dan after their forefather. Now, again, this is interesting. Remember I told you the timeline's funky? This going up to Leshem, which is also known as Laish, Laish, actually happens in the book of Judges, in the 18th chapter of the book of Judges. And this is interesting because where it happens in the book of Judges is actually considered kind of a rebellious period. And Dan is a rebellious tribe. What do I mean rebellious? Rebellious against who? God. Against God, yeah? And so here's the thing. When you look at where Dan is supposed to be, down there by Ephraim, right? That is not where they end up. Look up top, and you see that little speck up top where it says Dan? That's where they end up. But here's the thing. It's not like they were like, well, God didn't give us our regular place, but look, we found a better one. It's more like they failed. They failed to be faithful, and they failed to take their allotted place. They literally got booted out of where they were supposed to go. And instead of fighting, and instead of, like Caleb would or Joshua would, they sort of went, there's somewhere, and literally they went up to Laish. It's covered in the book of Judges if you want to read it in chapter 18. They go up to Laish, and they find it looks like an easy target. That's literally what it looks like, kind of easy pickings. And so they take the easy way out, and they go up to Laish. Now, by the way, a little background on the town of Laish. Laish is one of the oldest settled cities pretty much on the planet. It was very likely where Abraham went through on his way down from Ur some 1,000-odd years earlier, or I guess, I don't know how many years, 800 years earlier it was. And if you ever get to go with us on the Israel trip, you can actually see where they have excavated the actual entrance to the city, the gate of Laish, right? Which is now called Tel Dan, because that is where Dan conquered it. However, it's pretty cool because when you're there, it's actually very, very, very possible that Abraham himself walked through that gate, because they have dated that gate all the way back to the time of Abraham. But if you know the rest of the story from, I'm going to guess it's somewhere in 1 Kings, I forget where it is exactly, Kings or Samuel, Dan moves up there. They take that little city of Laish, where it's kind of a nice little area there. It looks down on Lebanon on the other side. But of course, they start worshiping Baal. And I think they're the first tribe to get taken away by the Assyrians. It doesn't...
My people.
What's that? Yeah, your people. Yeah, Luigi's people, the Assyrians. Yeah. Okay. And then lastly, Joshua. Look at Joshua himself gets an allotment in verse 49. Joshua kind of gets his own little spot in the hill country of Ephraim, and according to J. Vernon McGee, he didn't get a very good spot. It's sort of his retirement home or something. But more importantly, the reason why it likely occurs here is it puts a little bookend on this pericope, this little section of scripture, yeah? Because the first part of this section goes to Caleb. So now Caleb's got his spot, Joshua's got his spot. Joshua didn't pick a very good spot, but he's not going to be around for much longer, okay? So both valiant spies from the book of Exodus find a permanent home in the promised land. It's 8:30, and the only last thing I was going to cover tonight was the cities of refuge, and then next week we were going to begin at the towns for the Levites. So I think I'm just going to stop right there. We've basically divvied up all the promised land, and then next week we'll pick up with the cities of refuge, and we'll do the towns for the Levites, and we might even get to the part where the eastern tribes head home back across the Jordan. We'll see how it goes when we pick it up next week. But does anybody have any questions or comments about all that division of tribe and stuff? What I meant to say about the lots was, I did cover it.
Okay.
The part I meant, I didn't forget, was I thought it was cool is how they sent those guys out to look at all the land and make divisions not knowing who would get what division, right? You know, it's like if you have your kids cut the cake, not knowing which piece they're going to get, they're going to try to make it as even as possible. I thought that was a really neat, fair way to do it, yeah? And then they got it divvied up by God, basically. God gives them each piece of it. That's all I had to say. Yeah. Anybody else? Is there anybody going to come back next week? Or Let me just wrap up with this one thought here tonight, though, yeah? I got to thinking, I was like, how am I going to wrap this up? So I was just until I got him, too. He was coming right from my open mouth. Yeah.
You had ended.
Because I get it, we kind of got bogged down in the detail tonight. And by the way, if you think that was bogged down, we just covered like 9 chapters, right? You know, so I was only cherry picking the most interesting parts. If you don't believe me, go back and read all 9 chapters. But I did want to say this. I thought it was interesting. If we take a step back, look at all this land that this little, what did I write in my notes here today? This little ragtag, small, nomadic band of escaped Egyptian slaves managed to wrestle away from the Canaanites. Does that make sense? Yeah? God's promise was fulfilled. Think about that. We sort of take it for granted. Oh yeah, if they were only faithful, how hard is that? Let me ask you this. You feel that way about your life? Are you faithful all the time? I know I'm not. Man, if you know my story, which I don't want to share with you right now, I have been wrestling with God for 5 months, 6 months on this? And he keeps pointing out my unfaithfulness. And he's been correct. Trying to be faithful. And then grumbling. And then trying to be faithful. So what they did by faith, it's pretty amazing. Not just kind of amazing, it's super amazing. You know what's amazing? They're there now. Right? It is amazing that they're there. In fact, we've been reading this book that Dr. Alan Hubbard's been reading, and Ron gave me his copy. The Eric Metaxas book is Atheism Dead or whatever, and I forget, there's a quote by somebody. They ask some ultra well-known, it's not Einstein, but it's somebody right up there with Einstein. Is there any evidence at all for the existence of God? And he said, yeah, it's easy. What? He goes, the Jews. It's true. I mean, think about it. They're amazing. It's like God clearly has something going on with these people. And what we've seen tonight, and again, I know it's been long and it's a slog or whatever, but when you scale back and look at the big picture, that's incredible what they did and what God did through a faithful people. All right, let's pray. Father God, thank you for this description, God, and this about, really, honestly, Lord, what the things that we can accomplish, God, when they are of your will, when we are faithful, and when your power is behind the task that you have set out for us to do. And so even on our own little lives, God, the things that we have to do, the little acts of service we do, the way we love each other, the way we perform at our jobs, our service to you in the kingdom of God, what we do for your kingdom, even in all of it, God. May we use today's teaching as an example, Lord, of how to live our lives faithfully before you and understand that when we are faithful and obedient to you, then your great power is behind us, and then your will can be accomplished, even with the likes of us. In your precious name, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen? Amen. All right.